welcome back to Prevention Works. So last time we were talking to Ariele Goldman, and I know I said 2 weeks from now we'd be continuing our interview with her. As you can tell, we filmed it in the same day, so we are in the same clothes. So we are going to continue our interview with Ariele, and we're going to continue right where we left off. So learning more about her time in Israel, a little bit more about her active addiction, and then we're going to focus a lot on recovery and her journey that she's taken the last 2 years in her recovery.
So, again, I'm Michelle Simons and co-host here.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to introduce us.
Okay. They know us by now, right?
I hope.
Yeah. So, so tell us a little more. So, so you got a DUI.
Yep.
In here in the U.S. And that was after you was that right after graduation?
I did not graduate.
You did not graduate. So tell us about that real quick.
So I was decided I was bored of going to school, and I didn't want to. I was like 2 months away from graduating.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do it anymore. Typical Ariele fashion. When I'm done with something, I'm done. And I got my GED, and I was like, wow, I should have just done this freshman year so I didn't have to waste all that time in school, which is like really distorted thinking. I do not encourage that, but that at the time, that's my truth. That's what I was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and most kids probably would feel that way, right? Or at least I'll speak for myself from like high school age. I just remember being like, not interested. My friends were fun, but I didn't have any interest in doing any work. Probably Emily was not.
I'm just sitting here like, oh, I liked learning. Going to school was okay.
But that's the beauty of it. Here we all are sitting here, very different age groups, you know, well, you guys are closer in age.
Yeah,
different
clearly.
personalities, but so many different experiences, you know? Yeah. Cool. So got a DUI. Parents sent you to Israel for a learning opportunity. Yeah, so tell us what happened.
They were probably pumped to get rid of me, too. They were probably really angry at me. So, this was a great opportunity. It was a year program in Israel. And, it was split into 3 sections. So there was a lot of Jewish teenagers from the United States. So they split us into 3 groups, and then we kind of cycled, through, every 4 months, we cycled through, a different part of the experience. So the first experience was an educational part in Jerusalem. So we had the opportunity to take college classes, and a lot of the students deferred their 4-year college in the United States, and they took some of the classes for credit that they could apply to their 4-year college. I personally did not have a plan. I did not sign up for college because I just didn't want to do it. I didn't care. Yeah. So I just didn't take the classes for credit because I didn't want to go to them. So that was the first part. The second part was Israel experience, and I lived in a town called Kfar Saba, which is 45 minutes north of Tel Aviv. And this was my favorite part of the experience, is I got to volunteer on a therapeutic horseback riding center for wounded soldiers and people with disabilities, and that was really fun, really, really fun. But I definitely smoked hash in the fruit field. But there was a lot of good things, but I was more concerned about the alcohol, and I was legal to drink in Israel, and the hash and all that stuff, and the party scene. The third part of the trip was the volunteering part, and we lived in Cholon, and that is right next to Tel Aviv, and it's a kind of a poorer community, and they did a lot of volunteer work. But, the thing about being in Israel is, everyone my age was into the party scene, so it was really hard to even decipher that I had a problem. Right. All of us got blackout drunk all the time. All of us smoked hash the entire time. But I know, from my experience, I probably did way too much, but all the other kids probably did too. Right. Well, at least from my point of view, which is probably not true. It probably wasn't all the kids, because from my point of view, it's I only surrounded myself with the kids that were doing that. Right. There's probably a good amount of people that weren't doing that. I just didn't even notice them. They weren't on my radar,
Yeah. And I think that happens a lot, right? Yeah. The more we start using, the more we surround ourselves with people that are, using like us.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That makes sense. So, so no matter where you are, you can find drugs and alcohol and get into that.
And I just wanted to add, I know you explained what a blunt is, but then you talked about a hash. Why don't we explain what that is too?
So I don't know if that's in America, but in the Middle East, it was kind of like a brick. You spot and then you like combine it with tobacco and a joint because it's so strong on its own. And it's kind of like, it's similar to, I think it comes from a marijuana plant too. But it's similar, but it's like different. It kind of gives you more of like a body high more than a mental high.
Okay.
But
yeah, so hashish, it is in the U.S., at least when I was growing up, it was around. I don't hear much about it nowadays, or hashish. Yeah.
Yeah, hashish.
Hashish. So anyway, so how long were you in Israel for?
So I was there about a year, and in typical Ariele fashion, there was like a month left of the program, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm bored, so I made my parents send me home.
Yep.
Okay.
So you came home, how old were you at this point?
I was 19.
19 years old, and where did your addiction take you from there? Because at this point, it's still kind of marijuana and alcohol.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
Which I hadn't tried a pill yet.
Okay.
So at that point, I'm 19 years old. All of my friends from high school have gone off to their four-year colleges. You know, they're all doing really well. And I'm kind of like the lingering person in the hometown. And, you know, I just kind of didn't want a job. And I didn't want to do anything I didn't want to do. And I found some other teenagers that were kind of doing the same thing as me. And that's when I was first introduced to prescription pills.
And what was the first prescription pill that you experimented with?
I think it was like Valium or something like that, but I just remember being like, oh wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And then it just was like anything else that was handed to me I would take.
Right.
Okay.
And was there any fear when you were taking the prescription pills, or?
None, and that's the scary part. You know, I used to look at myself as like, I'm fearless, I'll do anything, but in reality, I was so full of fear of being myself and being my own skin that I would do anything to not have to feel like that.
Right. So it was easier to just take something and
I was like,
lose the fear.
Yeah.
And it was somebody prescribed it, or do you remember if it was from the street, or?
I have no idea where they got it from. I just know that I was given them, and I really didn't care where they were coming from at all.
Right. So, and you said Valium, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Valium is something that is prescribed usually for anxiety. It's an anti-anxiety medication. Did we talked about benzodiazepines in the beginning, or did we skip that one?
No, we didn't. No.
So benzodiazepines, Valium, Klonopin, Ativan, Xanax.
Yeah, Xanax is the most common one there.
Yeah. So these are usually prescribed. Somebody goes to a doctor, hopefully a psychiatrist, but primary care doctors are prescribing it as well, and complain about, you know, anxiety issues and feeling what that feels like, and usually tend to be prescribed a benzo, which is anything on that sort of spectrum. Ativan probably being the mildest. But what we know about benzos is they can be highly addictive.
Yeah.
They can cause physical addiction, and the withdrawal from benzodiazepines is also very dangerous. It's
very dangerous. You can have a seizure and die.
Yeah, exactly.
So that and alcohol are the two that require medical detoxes that we are aware of. Heroin and opioid withdrawal is very physically painful.
But it can't kill you.
But it won't kill you.
You feel like you're going to die, but you're not going to die.
Right, exactly. So benzos and alcohol are definitely required medical detox.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, so you started using benzos, and can you talk about, so the disease of addiction is progressive.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me about the progression a little bit.
So, I mean, for me personally, like, I didn't really, like, lose much of anything in the beginning because I didn't really have, you know, that much to lose. I didn't have, like, a education or career or anything like that. You know, I think the only thing left to lose was, like, my family, which later on kind of did happen. But, you know, I was progressing, and then, like, at one point, someone had, you know, Percocet. And, like, I was already, like, like, you know, I wasn't, like, hooked on an everyday basis to like the random pills being thrown at me, but once the opiate went in my body, it was over.
Yeah.
You know, I think I might have done like a Percocet once, and then maybe a week later did another time, but then after like 2 or 3 weeks, I was definitely buying them every single day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we hear about that a lot, I think, with opiates, that the first time somebody experiences what that feels like, they either don't like it because they feel out of control and it makes them feel kind of sick, or you hear that, like, I loved it the second I tried it, right? So it's usually like a very two different
polar opposites.
Opposites, for sure. So you started using Percocets on a regular basis? Yep.
Yep. And at this point, I had a boyfriend, and I met him through the group of kids I was hanging out with. And we were, pretty much using together and buying Percocet together every day.
Yep. So you met people that were using like you. Yep. And was this around the time that the OxyContins were going around too, or?
No, I never did Oxycontin. I think it had just ended when I started using pills.
Kind of pulled them off the streets by then, yeah. So the OxyContin epidemic kind of began mid-'90s to late 90s, and then so what year are we talking about now about with the Percocet?
So I was like 19 going on 20 by the time I started using prescription medications, and I'm 30 now, so that's like 11 years ago.
2009.
2009.
Yeah, that's exactly 2009.
And that makes sense because the OxyContins were kind of pulled off, or at least they reeled it in a lot once the opioid epidemic started taking off here. So you ended up going from prescription pain medications to street drugs, correct? Can you tell me about the progression of that and how that unfolded?
So kind of what happened was, the Percocet was very long and dragged out. I used Percocet from 19 to 23. I ended up getting a waitressing job, and I was very high functioning, so it was really easy to hide. But all of my, my parents were kind of like, "Where's your money going?" And I always had these like lies and stuff like that, which was very typical of me at the time to lie. And eventually, at 23, I couldn't get Percocet, and I could find heroin. And at that point, I was so far into this opiate addiction that I just didn't care. I was like, sure, if it's going to ease this withdrawal, I'll do anything to ease the withdrawal.
Right. And you said your parents kind of noticed something was going on with the money.
Right.
Do you think they saw anything? So were you living at home at the time?
Yes.
Or you were?
Yes.
So do you think they noticed other things going on, or was it kind of still under wraps for them?
Maybe because I think that they were also in somewhat of a denial. I think that because it doesn't run in my family, they're not really used to what it looks like, and I think they just kind of thought I was like kind of a jerk. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know how to explain it. Like just like didn't have like good morals or anything like that, and I think it was definitely a form of denial for them. Until they literally found a syringe in my room, and even then, my mom thought it was like a school thing.
Right.
She thought, because I was in the medical assisting program, which I didn't finish at North Shore at the time. She thought it was for like phlebotomy.
Right.
So even up until then, she was in denial, and then after a little bit, she realized like, oh my God, there's a big problem.
Right. And probably parents don't even want to look. They're probably just like, oh God, this is not happening.
Not
this can't be it.
Yep.
Yeah. If we were to suggest anything to parents today, like if they see some of these, like what would be some of the signs you think they should look for?
It depends like at what age there's going to be different signs, and they don't all look the same. If they're already using opiates, I think some of the signs would be like, not showing up for family events, or like always lying or having excuses or manipulation. Having no money all the time, asking to borrow money, just really no progression, because a lot of times, like mine wasn't that obvious to begin with because I did have a full-time job.
Yeah, so that's good. And we have some like sort of statements like what to look for if your kid's using, right?
Yeah, and she listed most of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
she did a really good job. Exactly.
Life experience.
Yep.
Right. Great. So now we're talking like full-blown addiction, using heroin, and you eventually started using needles as well, doing IV. So was there any fear behind that when you were so the Percocets became too expensive?
Yep.
Is that kind of what happened?
Yep.
And then street heroin is much cheaper, as we know.
Much cheaper.
So typically a Percocet pill would run $30. I mean, I could be a little out of touch, but I don't know. I'm thinking.
I think it was like $30 at the time for a 30 milligram.
Yep. So
And
it's like
then-
they pay $1 a milligram on the street for these.
Yeah, and then I think heroin you could get like $40 for a bag, or they were like 3 for $100 or something like that, and that would last you a couple days. I mean, maybe it depends on your habit, but
Yeah, and your control.
yeah.
Yeah. So moved on to heroin. People you were hanging around with were using heroin.
Yep, we all kind of started to use that at once.
Yeah.
There was like a couple people I hung out with, and then my boyfriend at the time. But I do want to mention also, once it gets to heroin, the warning signs are going to get a lot more severe. It might even look like that also in Percocet addiction. The stealing, there's going to be a lot of stealing going on. There might even be legal cases, things like this. You know, eventually it's like right in your face obvious, but sometimes it's hard to look at that as your kid doing that, you know?
Right.
But I'm sorry, what was the original question?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what happens. It's the person that's, you know, I'm sure that's not the girl that your parents raised, right? With the values and morals and things like that. Right. But what happens is once somebody gets desperate with their addiction, it doesn't matter.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all. I stole from my parents.
Yeah.
I did some really, really horrible things while I was using.
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't want to leave people hopeless here by any means,
right.
But this is, you know, this is the progression of the disease. Once somebody has a habit, an opioid habit, and especially, you know, once it's sort of graduated to heroin and IV drug use, the need and the demand for it gets stronger and stronger. And therefore, you know, you're either going to, you feel like you're going to die, or I'm going to take this gold chain off the counter and go hawk it at the local pawn shop, right?
Right, and you know, your tolerance gets larger over time too, so you need more and more and more. It's basically like just a monster that just steals your soul from you.
Yeah, so they actually talk about something like that in 12-step fellowships, like loss of spiritual values.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, yeah, tell me more about that.
So, like what I do today in my recovery?
Well, what loss of spiritual values is, right?
So the loss of spiritual values, for me personally, is like although like I grew up with strong morals and values, and I, you know, always, even in active addiction, I always saw myself as a good person, even though I was like not showing that to the world and I had all these terrible behaviors. I always like knew in my core that I was a good person. So when I was using, as they say, like the loss of spiritual values, you just aren't acting in the way, like you're just not acting in a way that lines up with the person you really are. It's like it just steals your soul, and you just become like this robot that just like needs to be fed more and more and more drugs, and like you don't care what's in your way anymore. Yeah. It just hijacks you pretty much.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great description. Yeah, to help our audience understand what that's like. Because a lot of times we put it on a moral value, or like, you know, oh my God, this person's a criminal, or that kind of stuff. And it's really just about feeding an addiction. It's not, you know, somebody's out to hurt anybody or anything like that.
Right.
So as this addiction progressed, now, like we said, we're using IV heroin. How long did that last for? Or were you able to maintain that before you ended up in treatment, I assume, right?
Right. Yeah. So I used heroin for about a year, not IV yet, but then once I switched over to IV, I only lasted about 6 months till I like couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I was so like beaten down already, and there was still a lot of yets for me. There were still a lot of things that I hadn't done for the drug yet, but that's, you know, that's always available, you know, if something happened, which it, you know, God willing that it won't, but that's, you know, that's what they like to call it, is yets. Yeah, it lasted about 6 months.
Yep. And then did you end up going to a detox? Did somebody sort of intervene? How did that shift take place?
So basically my parents would not, you know, they would not just let me go, and I wanted them to like leave me alone so I could do what I wanted. Of course. They used to show up at houses I was at, and they just like chase me around and all kinds of things. And eventually my mom like went to the police and was like, arrest her, she uses drugs. And they were like, well, Mrs. Goldman, like we don't have any evidence, so we can't just like go up to her and arrest her. But he kind of like said something that really like clicked in her mind. He said to her, you know, Mrs. Goldman, you're gonna end up loving her to death. You're smothering her in a way that's keeping her from reaching rock bottom. So at that point, my parents said I'm not allowed in the house anymore. And I was kind of just like sleeping wherever I could sleep, and I just like, you know, and at the time when my mom found the syringes, it was like kind of like the pieces added up, and I just was so burnt out that I started my cycle of treatment, but I definitely did not get it on the first time.
Right. So so you ended up going to a detox. Did your parents get you in, or
So in the beginning, I think my parents just didn't know either, and I thought like 3 to 5 day detox was going to cure me, but that wasn't the case because the drugs and alcohol are the symptom of the disease. The disease is much more in depth than just the drugs and alcohol. So there's no way you can really work on that in a 3 to 5 day program. The 3 to 5 day program is just basically like a physical stabilization to get, the drugs out of your system. So every time I'd go to detox, it was kind of like I picked up a new puzzle piece, and that was like the information that kind of was like the seed planted in my brain. So it was definitely not like a waste of time. Like every time I learned something different, I was probably in and out of detox like, between 7 or 8 times.
Yep. And did you ever go to further treatment from there? You did.
So I went to a halfway house, and at the halfway house, I ended up getting 6 months clean, like completely abstinent.
Yep.
But I still had a lot of behaviors, and I was still pretty young. I was 24 at the time, and I just wasn't really willing to like look at myself. Like I still was kind of very misinformed about how the drug, it's not just about the drugs and alcohol. Like I thought if I don't have drugs and alcohol in my system, I'm going to be fine.
Right.
And it wasn't like that at all. Like, I had absolutely no coping mechanisms, and taking away my solution left me with no solution.
Right.
And without rerouting to a positive solution, like I'm left with nothing. So I was just, prone to just going back to the substance eventually.
Right. So you got the 6 months while you were in treatment, which is typical. We see this a lot. Being in treatment keeps you in kind of a safety net that isn't, if somebody's out on the street and they come out of detox, it's very easy to just go back to using.
Right.
When you're in that sort of bubble of treatment, you're surrounded by other people in recovery kind of doing the same thing.
Right.
So those 6 months were in the treatment facility.
No, not the whole time. I was there for 2 months, and then I got kicked out for passing a note with a guy.
Yeah.
And I kind of still have some resentment for getting kicked out because I didn't know that was a behavior. I kind of wish they had worked with me on that and taught me about what that really meant. And I truly believe as someone working in treatment, it's so important to teach these young women about the behaviors surrounding it and what can lead back to a relapse and things like that. But I managed to get another 4 months on my own, but I was just absent. I was angry. And at this time I had been broken up with my ex-boyfriend that I had used opiates and heroin with, and I found, another relationship hopping, a behavior. I found another boyfriend, and I was introduced to Adderall and gabapentin at this time, and that was after having 6 months absent. I had no tools and no defense against picking up again.
Right.
There's just one thing I know before we jump into Adderall and gabapentin. I just wanted to talk about your withdrawal symptoms and how that was for you, because you didn't really talk about it. And I mentioned it last episode, so I just want people to understand more about what they're about, if that's okay with you.
So for me, an opiate and heroin withdrawal, I never went into they say it gets worse after hour 24, 48 hours, whatever. But the worst that while I was in detox, it wasn't that bad because they're giving you Suboxone or methadone to ease the comfort meds to ease the withdrawal. So it wasn't as terrible. But if I wasn't in treatment, I was kind of waiting for the drug dealer to come around, which he always took his time. I would start feeling initially sweating, and then my bones were cramping up, my muscles hurt, severe agitation and irritability. I could probably have killed someone. I was just so on edge.
Yeah.
I remember just smashing my leg against a table because that pain felt better than the withdrawal, which is kind of crazy, but it was something to distract me. I was literally hurting my leg, but I didn't care at the time. It was so painful. And then you start sweating, and you have to, poop and stuff like that. It gets really vomit. It gets really, really ugly.
Yeah. So with the last few minutes that we have, we're going to jump into your recovery.
Yes.
So eventually, the 2 prescription medications, you started abusing those.
Right.
Eventually came off those on your own, right?
Right.
And tell me a little bit about recovery, what that is for you today.
Awesome. So luckily at that point, like I had never gone back to opiates. I had like came to a fork in the road where I was just like hit another rock bottom from the Adderall and gabapentin. So I had a little taste of a 12-step program before from being in treatment. And I kind of like just, you know, it was almost like a spiritual awakening. Like I was kind of like, I need to jump into this. Like I knew what I needed to do. Yeah. So I jumped into the 12-step program, and it was not easy. It was very hard, and I made some awesome friends. And today I kind of just like, I work a program, I do step work, and I have a lot of support that, you know, I can go to for basically anything. And the most important thing is like I have self-awareness now. Like I know when I'm like, you know, starting to stray away from the route that I want to be on. So I'm able to like align myself back into gear, which is really, really important for my recovery.
Great. Yeah. So we do want to talk about Ariele's recovery more, and we're going to have you on again.
Yeah. So this has been such a great experience being able to interview Ariele and get to know more about her journey. And we really do want to highlight her recovery at some point. So we're hoping we can have her back to talk more about her recovery, and hopefully we can get her mom to come on too, so we can talk a little bit and have a discussion with your mom as well, because we talked a little bit about that. Yes. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And we hope to have you back again soon.
I'll be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we know is addiction is a family disease, so bringing the family on, I think, would be really great. Yeah.
Larry and Lauren, or just...
I don't know how Larry's going to feel about it.
Whoever you want. And she will be talking again at an event that we're having in Marblehead, Three Voices event, so I'm just going to plug that really quick. Yep. It'll be at the Abbott Library. Michelle will be moderating, and she's going to be part of the discussion panel.
Yes, so you can see
the information is actually on the screen, and it will be up on our Facebook page as well, Prevention Works with an E, if you want to look into it more. So thank you for tuning in today. We hope to see you next episode.
And please find us on Facebook at Prevention Works.
Yep.
There it is.